Jonathan Reed had been stranded on this alien planet for days, his ship long destroyed in an unexpected crash. The wilderness around him was strange and wild, with towering trees and thick vines stretching high into the sky. The air was humid and filled with the scent of unfamiliar plants. There was no sign of any other life form, at least not anything he could recognize. But that didn't mean he was safe. He had been running for hours, desperate to escape the creatures that seemed to be hunting him. He had seen their shadows, heard their calls, but he didn't know what they were. All he knew was that they were not friendly. His survival instincts kicked in, and he pushed himself harder, moving through the thick underbrush with only the faint hope of finding a safe place. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the forest floor. Jonathan's steps were growing heavier, his body aching with exhaustion. He had no food, no water, and no weapons to defend himself. His only option was to find shelter. He needed a place to rest, to hide, at least until the creatures hunting him lost his scent. Then, as if the planet had granted him a small gift, he saw it, a dark opening in the side of a cliff, a cave. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He made his way toward the cave with all the speed he could muster, the urgency in his movements pushing him forward. The entrance to the cave was narrow, just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He slid into the dark interior, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Inside, the air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the humid heat outside. Jonathan leaned against the cave wall, his heart still racing. He couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in days, he felt like he might be safe. But that sense of safety didn't last long. As he looked around, he noticed something strange. The walls of the cave were covered in glowing markings, bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse softly in the dim light. The patterns were unlike anything he had ever seen before. They weren't natural, not in the way the cave walls were shaped. They were deliberate, as though someone, or something, had made them. Curious, Jonathan moved closer to the wall, his fingers tracing the patterns. He could feel the warmth radiating from them, a strange, almost comforting sensation. But there was something unsettling about it, too. It was as though the markings were alive, or perhaps connected to something deeper inside the cave, something he couldn't yet understand. The glow of the markings cast long shadows across the cave, creating an eerie atmosphere. Jonathan turned away from the wall and ventured further inside, deeper into the cave. As he moved, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. It was an odd sensation, like someone or something was watching him. He paused, his senses on high alert. He listened for any sound, any movement, but all he heard was the echo of his own breath. Pushing the thought aside, Jonathan continued. The cave seemed to stretch on endlessly, with narrow passageways and larger chambers. It was unlike any cave he had ever explored. The walls were smooth in some places, jagged in others. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, as if the cave had been untouched for centuries, waiting for someone, or something, to enter. Finally, after what seemed like hours of walking, Jonathan came upon a large chamber. The floor was covered in a soft, moss-like substance, and the air was thick with the scent of something sweet. In the center of the chamber was a strange cocoon-like structure, glowing softly in the darkness. Jonathan approached it cautiously, unsure of what to make of it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The cocoon was large, at least 3 meters in diameter, and its surface seemed to shimmer with a strange iridescence. It was suspended in the air, surrounded by a soft, glowing mist that made the entire chamber feel otherworldly. As Jonathan moved closer, he felt a chill run down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and his instincts screamed at him to leave. But something kept him there. It wasn't just the cocoon that intrigued him. It was the strange, almost magnetic pull he felt toward it. There was something about it that felt important. He knelt down beside the cocoon, his hands hovering just above it. The surface was warm to the touch, and he could feel a faint pulse, like a heartbeat, coming from within. His curiosity got the better of him, and he gently placed his hand on the cocoon. The moment he made contact, the glow intensified, casting brighter light across the chamber. Jonathan drew back in surprise, but the cocoon remained still. A deep, unsettling feeling washed over him, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something primal, like a sense of destiny. Jonathan didn't understand it, but he couldn't deny it. He couldn't explain why, but he felt as though he was meant to be there. He was meant to protect whatever was inside that cocoon. He spent the rest of the evening in the cave, his eyes constantly drawn to the strange glowing structure. As night fell, the creatures of the forest outside became louder. Their calls echoed through the cave entrance. But Jonathan didn't move. He didn't want to leave. Despite the danger he knew lurked outside, Jonathan felt safe here. Safe with the cocoon. He settled down on the soft moss and tried to sleep, but the strange pull of the cocoon kept him awake, his mind racing with questions. What was it? Why was it here? What did it mean for him? Hours passed, and the forest outside seemed to quiet down. But inside the cave, the atmosphere grew heavier. Jonathan could sense something was happening, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The air seemed to shift, growing warmer, and the faint pulsing of the cocoon grew stronger. Just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he heard it. An odd sound, like a low hum. It came from deep within the cave, echoing off the walls. Jonathan sat up, his heart racing. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. It wasn't the creatures from the forest. This was something else, something that was drawing nearer, something that was not of this world. He stood up and glanced around, his eyes darting toward the entrance of the cave. Was it possible that he wasn't as alone as he thought? He reached for his survival pack, his fingers brushing over the items he had left. Just a few basic supplies and a flare gun. Not much use against whatever might be coming for him, but it was all he had. The hum continued, reverberating through the cave walls, and Jonathan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up again. Something was coming, something that had been waiting for him. He could feel it in the air, thick with anticipation. Unseen in the shadows, in the deepest part of the cave, something stirred. Jonathan awoke the next morning with a deep sense of unease. The previous night's events lingered in his mind like a dream he couldn't shake. He had barely slept, constantly shifting on the mossy floor of the cave, his mind buzzing with questions he couldn't answer. The low hum he had heard had not stopped echoing through the cave's walls like some unseen presence, yet he had been unable to locate its source. As daylight began to filter through the narrow opening of the cave, casting soft beams of light across the floor, Jonathan slowly pushed himself up. His muscles ached, his body tired from the restless night. He rubbed his eyes and glanced over at the cocoon in the center of the cave, its glowing surface still faintly pulsing. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It wasn't a fear-based feeling, but one of curiosity and something else. Something that made him feel as though he had a responsibility here. He stood up and stretched his stiff limbs before walking slowly toward the cocoon. His eyes traced its edges, noticing how the light around it seemed to shimmer and change, almost as if it was reacting to his presence. Jonathan knelt down cautiously, his fingers hovering just above its surface. The warm glow was gentle against his skin, and for a moment he closed his eyes, feeling the strange pulse within. It was as if the cocoon itself had a heartbeat, slow and steady, but somehow alive in a way that he couldn't quite understand. The hum from the night before had grown faint now, like a distant memory. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that it had been connected to this thing, this cocoon. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to continue examining it or step away. But his instincts, those same instincts that had kept him alive since the crash, told him to stay and observe. Something was happening here. Something important. Jonathan's thoughts were interrupted when a low growl echoed from the entrance of the cave, distant but unmistakable. He tensed. The creatures were back. He didn't know what they were, but he knew one thing. They weren't friendly. He grabbed his survival pack, which had remained beside him, and quickly pulled out his flare gun. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He checked the ammunition and loaded the flare, knowing it would offer only a brief distraction, at best. The growl sounded again, closer this time, and Jonathan moved to the cave entrance, cautiously peering out into the alien wilderness beyond. The dense forest was still and quiet. The creatures he had encountered earlier hadn't been around, but that didn't mean they had given up on him. They were relentless, and as long as he was alive, they would keep coming. He took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the flare gun. He needed to find a way to fend off whatever was out there. And maybe, just maybe, the cocoon held some answers. There was a strange, magnetic pull to it, something that he couldn't ignore. He couldn't just leave it behind. Not yet. Not when he felt like he was meant to be here. The sound of something scraping against the ground outside snapped him back to reality. His pulse quickened, and he ducked low to avoid being seen. He glanced over at the cocoon, still glowing softly. He wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to it, but there was a sense of duty building inside him. He had to protect it. Something inside it, something that was yet to emerge, was important. Jonathan had survived countless close calls, but none of them had made him feel like this, like everything depended on this single moment. Whatever was inside that cocoon wasn't just some alien creature, it was something far more significant. He could feel it. He moved cautiously to the back of the cave, away from the entrance, keeping his eyes trained on the cocoon as the creature outside continued to make noise. It was close now. He needed to figure out what was happening inside the cave, but his attention was split between the unknown creature at the entrance and the glowing cocoon. It seemed to call to him, its pulse growing stronger with every second. The creatures outside were getting closer, and Jonathan's heart rate increased. He couldn't keep hiding forever. Suddenly, a loud, sharp screech echoed through the cave, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. The creatures had arrived. He crept forward, his eyes locked on the narrow entrance. The growls grew louder, closer, and Jonathan knew that the creatures had already picked up his scent. There was no time left. They would be on him any second. In a flash of instinct, Jonathan grabbed the flare gun and fired it into the air. The flare shot up in a burst of bright light, casting the cave in an eerie glow. The creatures hesitated for a moment, the light from the flare blinding them temporarily, but they quickly regained their senses and moved forward with terrifying speed. Jonathan wasn't sure if the flare would do much to stop them, but it was his best chance. He sprinted toward the deeper recesses of the cave, hoping the creatures wouldn't follow him inside. He didn't know what was happening with the cocoon, but he had no choice but to trust that the cave would offer him shelter. It had to. Just as he turned to make his way deeper into the cave, there was a sudden, loud crack. The sound came from behind him, somewhere near the cocoon. Jonathan froze, turning to see what was happening. The cocoon, which had remained still and quiet for so long, had started to move. The surface of it rippled as if something inside was shifting. It wasn't just a slow, steady pulse anymore. There was a distinct movement from within, a stirring that Jonathan could feel in his bones. The glow from the cocoon intensified, casting strange shadows on the cave walls. It was alive. Something inside it was alive. Jonathan stood frozen, his eyes locked on the cocoon as it began to crack open. A sound like glass breaking filling the air. His mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. The creatures were still outside, closing in, but all his focus was on the cocoon. The hum, the pulse, the glow, all of it seemed to be coming from the creature inside. Whatever was emerging, it was important, and it seemed that it needed him as much as he needed it. The cocoon cracked open further, revealing a glimpse of something large, something powerful, and yet still hidden in the folds of its shell. Jonathan took a cautious step closer, not sure whether he should run or stay. But before he could move again, a piercing screech rang out from the entrance of the cave, followed by the unmistakable thumping of heavy footsteps. He didn't have much time. His heart racing, Jonathan rushed toward the cocoon, his eyes still locked on the creature that was emerging. The cocoon split open completely, and for a brief moment, he saw it. It was a creature unlike anything he had ever imagined. Its skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow, its eyes large and intelligent, and its body, though small, held an undeniable power. Jonathan hesitated. The creature inside the cocoon was unlike anything he had ever seen before, but there was something about it, something in its gaze, that made him feel as though they were connected. It needed him. And just as Jonathan reached out to touch it, the creatures outside surged forward, their growls growing louder, echoing through the cave. Jonathan had to make a choice. Jonathan stood frozen, his hand hovering just above the glowing creature that had emerged from the cocoon. Its large, dark eyes were locked onto him, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The creature was unlike anything Jonathan had ever seen. A strange blend of organic material and bioluminescent light, its skin shifting colors with every breath it took. There was something otherworldly about it, but at the same time it felt familiar. He didn't understand it, but deep down, Jonathan knew this creature was important, more important than anything he had encountered in his life. But the growl from the cave entrance, sharp and dangerous, pulled him back into the present. The creatures were getting closer, and Jonathan could feel the ground vibrating beneath his feet with each approaching step. His pulse quickened as panic started to rise, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The creature in front of him, whatever it was, needed his protection. He didn't know how or why, but the connection he felt to it was undeniable. In that instant, Jonathan knew his survival wasn't the only thing at stake. The creature was connected to something larger, something that could change everything. The growls grew louder. The creatures outside the cave were almost upon him, and there was no way to escape without facing them. Jonathan glanced around, his eyes frantically searching for a way out. The cave was narrow, with little room for maneuver, and the entrance was the only way in or out. He couldn't fight them all off, not without better weapons or backup. His flare gun, the only weapon he had, wouldn't be enough against whatever was out there. The creature, still standing in front of him, tilted its head slightly, as though studying him. Its large eyes seemed to glow even brighter, as if reacting to his thoughts. Jonathan's chest tightened. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't run. He couldn't let the creature be harmed. Without thinking, he moved closer to it, kneeling down to place his hand gently on its glowing skin. The moment his fingers touched it, a wave of warmth flooded through his body, and the creature let out a soft, almost musical sound. It wasn't a sound of fear or aggression, but something else, something calming, as if it recognized him. Jonathan's mind raced, trying to process everything that was happening. His instincts had always guided him in the past, but this was different. He was no longer just surviving. He was protecting something far greater than himself. The creature needed him, and somehow he knew he had to keep it safe, no matter the cost. The ground beneath his feet shifted again, and the growls outside became more urgent, more aggressive. Jonathan's eyes darted toward the entrance. He needed to think fast. Suddenly, the creature moved. Its body rippled with energy, and it floated slightly off the ground. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. It was like watching something alive, yet otherworldly, moving with an unnatural grace. The creature stepped forward, its movements slow but purposeful, as if it understood the danger outside and was preparing to face it. Jonathan watched in awe as the creature extended one of its limbs, which appeared to be made of the same glowing material as its skin. It reached toward the walls of the cave, touching them gently. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls flickered, and the cave seemed to respond to its touch, as if coming alive. A soft hum filled the air. The same hum that Jonathan had heard the night before, now growing louder, more powerful. The connection between the creature and the cave was unmistakable. Jonathan could feel it in the air, in the way the walls seemed to pulse with life. The creature was more than just an alien. It was part of the cave, part of the planet, and somehow it had called him here. The hum reached a crescendo, and the creature's body shimmered. It looked almost as if it was merging with the environment, its glow blending with the bioluminescent patterns on the walls. Jonathan stepped back, unable to tear his eyes away from the surreal scene unfolding before him. His thoughts were clouded with confusion, but there was no time to dwell on it. The creatures outside were growing restless. They were getting closer. Jonathan's hand tightened around the flare gun. He could hear the thudding of their footsteps, and now they were almost at the entrance of the cave. It was only a matter of moments before they would be inside. He needed a plan, and fast. As if reading his mind, the creature turned toward him. Its large, intelligent eyes locked onto his, and Jonathan could have sworn it was communicating with him, not with words, but with emotions. There was a sense of urgency, a quiet plea for him to act. Jonathan's heart raced. He had no idea what was happening or how he could protect them both, but somehow he knew the creature trusted him. It was no longer just a matter of survival. It was a matter of protecting something far more valuable. The growls grew louder, and then the creatures attacked. Jonathan didn't have time to think. With a final glance at the creature, he ran toward the entrance, ready to face whatever came through. His flare gun was his only weapon, and he knew it wouldn't stop them, but it would buy him some time. He rushed to the mouth of the cave, positioning himself between the creatures and the glowing being. The first creature that appeared in the entrance was massive, its dark eyes gleaming with hunger. Its body was sleek and muscular, with sharp claws and fangs. The creature's growl was deafening, echoing through the cave like a battle cry. Jonathan fired the flare gun, the bright light shooting into the air. The creature paused, momentarily stunned by the sudden burst of light. Jonathan took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The flare wasn't enough to stop it, but it gave him a brief moment to act. The creature lunged, its claws swiping through the air with deadly precision. Jonathan ducked just in time, feeling the air rush past him as the creature's claws narrowly missed his head. He scrambled back, trying to regain his footing. But the creature wasn't done yet. It lunged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his arm. Jonathan fired another flare, this one aimed directly at the creature's face. The bright light forced it to recoil, but it didn't retreat. Jonathan was running out of time. He needed to do something, anything, to stop the creature. The creature let out a deafening screech, and Jonathan knew it was calling for reinforcements. He couldn't keep this up for long. The odds were against him, but he wasn't going to give up. He glanced back at the creature behind him, the one still standing in the center of the cave, glowing and pulsating with energy. Without thinking, Jonathan grabbed a rock from the cave floor and hurled it at the creature attacking him. The rock struck the creature's side, causing it to stumble. It growled in pain, but Jonathan didn't wait to see if it would retaliate. He lunged toward the creature at the center of the cave, reaching for it with everything he had. The moment his fingers touched its glowing surface, the world around him seemed to shift. The cave walls vibrated with energy, and the creature's body rippled in response. Jonathan could feel a surge of power coursing through him, a connection to the creature, to the planet itself. In an instant, the creature at the entrance was blasted back by an unseen force. The cave was alive, protecting them both. Jonathan didn't fully understand how it worked, but he didn't care. The creature was protecting him, and in that moment, he realized that he was no longer just a survivor. He was part of something much larger. The cave hummed again, louder this time, and the creatures outside paused. They had been pushed back, but Jonathan knew they wouldn't stay away forever. He needed to keep moving, keep fighting. But now, with the creature by his side, he felt more confident, than ever before. Jonathan took a deep breath and turned back to face the creature. It was no longer just an alien being. It was something more. Something that, together with him, could change everything. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of two species. And in that moment, Jonathan knew his role was far greater than he ever imagined. The ground beneath Jonathan's feet trembled again. But this time, it wasn't just the creatures outside. It was the cave itself. The hum that had been growing in intensity for days now resonated like a warning. The creature that had once been so mysterious now seemed like an ally. But with the queen and her army closing in, Jonathan knew the time for hiding was over. He had to act. The creature beside him, the one that had emerged from the cocoon, was still glowing, its presence more powerful than ever. It wasn't just a passive force. It seemed alive, connected to the very rock of the cave. The walls, the floor, the air itself pulsed with energy, responding to the creature's will. Jonathan could feel it in his bones. This was more than just a fight for survival. It was a battle that would shape the future of both their worlds. Jonathan's thoughts were interrupted by a loud, screeching sound from outside. The creatures were coming again, and this time, they were not alone. He could hear the heavy thuds of more bodies, more than he had ever encountered. The creatures that had chased him earlier had brought reinforcements. He didn't have much time. He turned to look at the creature beside him. Its eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, it seemed to communicate with him. Not with words, but with emotions, feelings of urgency, a desire for action. The connection between them was stronger than ever, as if it was waiting for him to take the lead. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He had no choice. He knew what he had to do. The creature stepped forward, its glowing body flickering and shifting, and as it moved, the ground trembled even more. The walls of the cave seemed to respond to its movements, and a soft glow filled the air. Jonathan followed closely behind, ready for whatever would come next. He couldn't stop now. The creatures outside were nearing the entrance, their growls echoing through the cave. Jonathan could see their shadows stretching across the narrow opening. He raised the flare gun, his only weapon, aiming it toward the entrance. His fingers tightened around the trigger. He was prepared to fight, but he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Then, in the distance, Jonathan saw them, alien figures unlike anything he had imagined. The creatures that had chased him were nothing compared to what was now approaching. They were massive, their forms covered in dark, tough armor, their eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. The Queen's army had arrived. Jonathan's heart raced. He wasn't prepared for this. He had no weapons, no plan, nothing but the flare gun and the creature at his side. But the creature wasn't alone. He wasn't alone. They had each other. The creature beside Jonathan began to move faster, its glow intensifying as it reached the entrance of the cave. Jonathan moved with it, staying close but keeping his distance. The air around them crackled with energy as the creature seemed to draw power from the very environment, the cave responding to its every movement. Jonathan could feel it too, the power, the energy building within the cave itself. When they reached the entrance, the massive alien figures were already there, standing just outside the cave. The creatures growled, their mouths open, their teeth sharp. They were waiting for their chance to strike. Jonathan held his breath, clutching the flare gun tightly. But it was the creature beside him that made the first move. Without warning, the creature leapt forward, its body shimmering with energy as it collided with the alien army. The ground beneath them shook, and the walls of the cave seemed to reverberate with the impact. The cave's energy surged, and Jonathan could see the alien figures falter for a moment, as if they were being repelled by some unseen force. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what was happening. The creature wasn't just fighting. It was calling upon the power of the cave itself. The walls, the very earth beneath them, seemed to bend to its will. The army of creatures hesitated, but only for a moment. With a loud, high-pitched screech, The alien forces advanced again, but this time they were met with a force far greater than they could have imagined. The creature was pushing back, but it wasn't just strength, it was the energy of the cave itself. Jonathan could feel it too, and it was more than enough to shift the odds in their favor. But even as the creature and the alien army clashed, Jonathan knew this was only the beginning. The Queen was still out there. The Queen, the one who had sent these creatures, was still coming, and she was powerful. He couldn't let the battle be decided by the creature alone. He had to be a part of it. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan ran toward the fighting, his pulse quickening with each step. The flare gun in his hand seemed insignificant now, but he couldn't let that stop him. The creature had chosen him, and he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when everything depended on it. He reached the front line, where the creature and the alien army were locked in a battle of strength and will. Jonathan stepped forward, shouting at the top of his lungs, his voice drowned out by the chaos. He fired the flare gun into the air, hoping the light would distract the aliens, just long enough to turn the tide in their favor. For a moment, everything went still. The flare's light hung in the air, casting long shadows on the cave walls, and the alien army stopped in their tracks. The creature that had been fighting them paused, its glowing body flickering, as if waiting for something. And then, Jonathan saw it. The Queen. She appeared at the entrance of the cave, her massive form towering over the battle. Her eyes glowed with a fierce, otherworldly light, and her body was covered in thick armor, her limbs strong and powerful. She was here. And she wasn't backing down. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine as the Queen's gaze locked onto his. There was no fear in her eyes, only anger. She wasn't just angry at the creature or the cave. She was angry at him, the human, the one who had disrupted her plans. The battle continued, but Jonathan knew they couldn't win this fight without confronting her. She was the leader, and if they didn't stop her, the war would never end. He glanced at the creature beside him, who was now standing tall and firm, its glowing form bright and powerful. The creature had the power to push back the army, but it needed Jonathan's help to face the Queen. Together, they were stronger. Jonathan nodded to the creature, his resolve clear. They would face the Queen together. He didn't know how, but he would fight for their survival. For the creature's future. For the future of both their worlds. With one final push, the creature advanced, its body glowing brighter than ever before, and Jonathan followed, determined to protect what they had fought so hard to preserve. The cave hummed with energy as the battle reached its climax, and the Queen, powerful and determined, moved to meet them. Jonathan raised his flare gun one last time, his fingers trembling. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol that he would fight, no matter the odds. No matter the danger. And as the creature and the Queen collided, the future of two worlds hung in the balance. But Jonathan knew one thing. No matter what happened, they would not go down without a fight.